Hello, my name is Adam Rutledge. I have just finished the Spirit Empowered Church class through AG and through Pathway. This is my final presentation. We took a lot of stuff away from the class, but the main thing that really stuck out to me most is how the AG and how churches as a whole could value more from disciple making and how we can be disciple making churches. Not just churches that have large numbers, but numbers that can grow spiritually and together and in community. That's what we'll be talking about here in this presentation. So the theme that I'm talking about is being a disciple-making church and how we as the local church can make more disciples and disciple makers. So it may seem obvious for a church to create disciples and make making disciples, but studies show that actually less than 5% or 5% or less actually churches in the U.S. actually strive to have a disciple making communities in their churches. So there's not really a focus on outreach. However, it is just a church that is continuing to have Sunday morning service, and that's pretty much it. So churches aren't really offering forms of discipleship. So that's the number one thing. There's just not really communities or spaces that people can grow together in small groups. It is mostly, like I said, just a Sunday service, and then people usually go home. A lot of these churches may grow in numbers over time. They might have a big, huge Sunday service congregation, but the actual number of small groups and individual one-on-one growing is just not actually happening. So there's no real spiritual growth there, only growth in numbers. And the last thing that we see is that you will never actually make disciple makers without discipleship. So that's one of the biggest things is we can be disciples in our church, but if we want to be disciples who make disciples who make disciples, just like Jesus talked about in the Gospels, being a fisher of men, this is something that will not actually happen if we do not have these intimate groups where people can grow in their own spiritual walk and want to grow others in their spiritual walk as well. Basically, the way I would kind of dumb it down or say it in a boiled down version is that people are not being able to experience all that God has for them because we're not creating spaces where they're actually able to do that. Number two, we are all leaders. So the biggest things that we have to understand about creating these small spaces and trying to reach people in our churches who can be disciple makers is knowing that we all have power and authority from God. We all are called to some form of leadership. Number one, a leadership is not based around a platform. It is not based around being able to hold a microphone, but it's based around the influence that you have. So one of the things that I think we can teach in our churches is that regardless of where you're at, whether it be at school, whether it be in your own personal walk or job or whatever it is, you have influence and you are able to influence people closer to Christ and be able to help them also become disciple makers and create more disciples for the kingdom. Number two, we are all part of the priesthood of all believers. This is actually a point that was talked about in the class. But the passage that I pulled from this was actually 1 Peter 2. It was 1 Peter 2:5, and it says, "You yourselves, as living stones, a spiritual house, are being built to a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For it stands in Scripture." And then he goes on to go through the passage of Scripture talking about Christ being the cornerstone. But number one of all things, we're all a part of the royal priesthood of all believers. And what does that mean? That means that regardless of the spiritual platform that you are placed on, you are called to minister to people and grow them closer to Christ and evangelize and show them how to be disciples who want to follow Jesus. And our last point on this slide here is that we need to operate with the gifts that God has given us. I know I talked about not only creating spaces so people can see their gifts, but also knowing that as we are part of the priesthood, God has wired us with gifts that can grow not only our churches, but can grow new people to Christ as well and help fellow believers know the calling and the purpose and the gifts that God has given them. Number two on big points here is to be on the same page. So a lot of these different sections in this class talked about having vision for your churches. That is one of the biggest things, having vision and having a clear and concise core values for your church. Not every single person has to, know them as soon as they walk in the door. But as a church functioning, it is really, really helpful for people as soon as they walk in the door to know what your church values, what your mission is, and what you're trying to do in your area as a church. And number two, like I said, number 2 and 1 kind of go together with missions and values, but hopefully when people come to your church, they're able to see those and know what you're trying to do and who you're trying to minister to. And our last point on this slide is to continue to speak into and fan the flame of mission. So not only are people seeing it as soon as they walk in the door, but we're going to continue to talk about it as well. It could be a sermon series, it could be through small groups, however you want to get people to know that. It's up to you as as your pastor in your church to know how you want to do it. But have people involved in the mission. Don't just make it a sort of a give and take on a Sunday morning, right? It's not just you go up there, the pastor tells you this stuff, and you leave. But people actually are a part of the mission that's happening at your church, so they can help it grow. Last point is to do life together. That's one of the biggest things. So create small groups in your churches. Create spaces where people can know that they're a part of what's going on in your church, and to know that you ought to do life together. A great book, actually, is funny enough, is Life Together by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, to be able to know more about what it means to be in community with fellow believers. But it is a way to be able to create spaces so people can grow, not only on a Sunday morning, but grow in small groups as well. Number 2 is to communicate and do life together, not only inside of organized church events, but to do it outside as well. So one of the biggest things is to recognize that influence that you have, right? No matter what circle you're in, go out and have dinner together, have people over to play games, right? Find spaces where you can do stuff outside of church, doing life together and growing personally one-on-one, because when a church grows outside of the 4 walls, they grow spiritually and they grow even more inside of those 4 walls. And the last point here is to seek one another's counsel and pray together. This is the biggest thing. And this will even happen naturally as you sort of do stuff outside of the church. Once you start to build those one-on-one relationships with people, you will start to build those connections, and then more people can then join that. So the biggest thing I would say is when somebody has something they're going through, when somebody's dealing with something, we ought to live how Jesus lived, right? Pray for those people, and seek, go to counsel for those people, and know that you can grow together not only within the 4 walls, but grow one-on-one spiritually and together. Last one is to serve together. So find ways to serve together in your church and in your community. So a lot of churches will, again, they get too caught up in the 4 walls and they're not serving outsourced, right? So whatever community your church is in, find some way to serve. I don't know if it's a food pantry, I don't know if it's a clothing drive, I don't know what it is, but find ways to church. Find ways to church. Find ways to serve as the church in your community. Number 2, take spiritual gifts tests, like I said before. Knowing that we are all wired differently with different gifts that God has given us, it's a really good way to find out how you can serve, whether it be with some sort of team on the church or a way that we can grow and outreach in the community around us. And our last one is to invite new people to your group and invite new people to your church. So as you've successfully created these groups, as you have successfully grown your church spiritually, now it's time to invite new people, right? And the way that you set this up, it should be a way that any new person can come in and get plugged in, find out the gifts that God has given them, find out the purpose that they have, and grow that relationship with God, and move from them being saved to grow in their walk with Christ. That is pretty much all I have. There's a citation for you on some of the articles that I found, but that is pretty much it. Thank you for your time.